In the vast, silent wilderness of Oregon's Deschutes National Forest, where ancient pines stand sentinel over frozen lakes, lies a mystery as cold and enduring as the winter of 1924. A story whispered around campfires, a tale of three trappers, a brutal crime, and a killer who, despite overwhelming suspicion, walked away unpunished for the ultimate act of savagery. This is the saga of the Lava Lake murders, an unsolved enigma that echoes through the Cascades a century later. Our story begins in the autumn of 1923. Three men, all residents of Bend, Oregon, ventured deep into the wilderness. There was 50-year-old Edward Nickols, a seasoned fur trapper and the caretaker of a rustic log cabin owned by logging contractor Edward Logan. With him were 35-year-old Roy Wilson, a former U.S. Marine, and 25-year-old Dewey Morris, an Iowa native and fellow logger. Their mission: to spend the harsh winter months trapping valuable furs, a trade that promised both solitude and a decent livelihood. The men set up their operations in Logan's cabin, a remote sanctuary near Little Lava Lake. Life there was hard but rewarding. Nickols, however, carried a shadow of unease. He had a history with a particularly volatile individual named Charles Kimsey, a man known by many aliases, including Lee Collins. Nickols and Kimsey had trapped together the previous winter, and a quarrel over a purportedly stolen wallet had escalated into a chilling death threat from Kimsey. It was this fear, this lingering menace, that prompted Nickols to ask Wilson and Morris to stay with him through the winter. They were his protection. For a time, their vigilance seemed unwarranted. The winter months passed with relative peace. The men were successful. Nickols had even sold a sled full of expensive furs in Bend before Christmas. On January 15, 1924, a resort owner named Alan Wilcoxon visited their cabin. He spent a pleasant evening with the trappers, finding them in good spirits, their traps bountiful. When Wilcoxon departed on the morning of January 16th, he waved goodbye, unaware he was the last man to see Edward Nickols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris alive. Weeks turned into months. Correspondence from the trappers, once regular, ceased. As spring approached, a gnawing worry began to creep into the hearts of their loved ones back in Bend. Dewey Morris's brother, Innes Owen Morris, and Pearl Linz, superintendent of the Tumalo Fish Hatchery, grew increasingly uneasy. The mink traps they occasionally checked in the area were untouched, unmaintained, a glaring red flag for any seasoned woodsman. By April, as the heavy ice of winter began its slow surrender to the warming sun, a search party set out for the cabin. What they found was not just absence, but a tableau of sudden, violent interruption. Inside the log cabin, burnt food sat congealed in pots on the stove. The dining table was still set for a meal, as if the men had simply stepped away for a moment. An emaciated cat, barely clinging to life, was a silent witness to the passage of time. 2 pairs of guns, a Luger automatic pistol, and a .22 Colt revolver were missing from the rack. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle within the confines of the cabin walls. The true horror, however, lay just outside. Behind the cabin, in the corner of the fox pen, lay a blood-stained claw hammer. The pen itself, which once housed 5 valuable foxes belonging to Logan, was empty. Further inspection revealed the frozen carcasses of numerous martens, foxes, and a skunk still caught in their untended traps, a clear sign of the trappers' abrupt disappearance. The next day, Deschutes County Sheriff Clarence A. Adams arrived to take charge of what was clearly a ghastly crime scene. Near the shore of Big Lava Lake, the searchers found the trappers' missing sled, now stained with dark, unmistakable human blood. On a trail leading to the lake, the thawing snow revealed even more gruesome evidence: pools of blood, clumps of hair, and a human tooth. On the lake's edge, a chilling detail: a discernible depression in the ice, revealing where a hole had been precisely cut, then allowed to freeze over. Someone had put something, or someone, into the lake. The lake, in its icy grip, had held its secret for months, but with the continued thaw, it began to relinquish its grim contents. Innes Morris and Sheriff Adams made the horrifying discovery. Floating to the surface of Little Lava Lake were the bodies of Edward Nickols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris. They were fully dressed, slightly decomposed, and, in the sheriff's grim assessment, fiendishly butchered. Autopsies confirmed the brutality. All three men had died from a combination of gunshot wounds and blunt force trauma. Roy Wilson had been shot in the right shoulder and, chillingly, behind the ear with a pistol. Edward Nickols suffered a shattered jawbone from a shotgun blast and a bullet hole in his head, likely from a revolver. He was found still wearing his indoor reading glasses, and a watch in his pocket had stopped at 9:10, a silent marker of their last moments. Dewey Morris had been shot in the left forearm and sustained a severe skull fracture, almost certainly from the blood-stained hammer found near the cabin. The details suggested not a spur-of-the-moment attack, but a calculated execution, likely by more than one person. The varying weapons, the different levels of skill in skinning the stolen foxes found later, and the sheer force required all pointed to at least two perpetrators. Sheriff Adams theorized that two men had entered the cabin, shared a meal, then used some form of subterfuge to lure the trappers outside, where they were ambushed, their own guns turned against them. The investigation quickly turned to the man Edward Nickols had feared most, Charles Kimsey. Nickols had already sold a large haul of furs, but the men had continued trapping. The stolen furs from their recent efforts became a crucial lead. Just days after the estimated time of death, on January 24th, a Portland traffic officer encountered a man carrying a gunny sack, asking for directions to a fur dealer. The man identified himself as Ed Nickols and presented Nichols's trapper's license. He then sold the furs to the Schumacher Fur Company for $110. Police were convinced this man was Kimsey. A $1,500 reward was issued for Kimsey's arrest and conviction. But Kimsey, a master of evasion with a long police record, including an escape from an Idaho prison and the 1923 attempted murder of stagecoach driver W.O. Harrison, whom he'd beaten and thrown down a well, had vanished. The Lava Lake case went cold, a chilling unsolved mystery in the annals of Oregon. 9 long years passed, then a break. On February 17, 1933, Charles Kimsey was spotted and apprehended in Kalispell, Montana. His immediate denial of the Lava Lake murders was telling. "They think I killed those trappers, but I didn't," he declared. "I was in Colorado working on the Moffat Tunnel at the time." His unprompted alibi, offered before officers could even question him, immediately raised suspicion. However, this is where the pursuit of justice for the trappers hit its most frustrating obstacle. Despite a wealth of circumstantial evidence connecting Kimsey to the crime, his threats, his violent history, his possession and sale of the stolen furs, the case for the Lava Lake murders was deemed weak. The Portland fur dealer, 9 years older, couldn't positively identify Kimsey, who had aged and grown bald, and most critically, State Police Officer Arthur Tuck, among others, later confirmed that Kimsey's alibi of working on the Moffat Tunnel during the winter of 1923 to 24 was in fact airtight. If Kimsey was in Colorado, he couldn't have been at Lava Lake. Unable to definitively link Kimsey to the murder scene, and with the primary murder case faltering, authorities pivoted. They charged him instead with the 1923 attempted murder of W.O. Harrison, the stagecoach driver he'd thrown down a well. Harrison, who had remarkably survived, was able to positively identify Kimsey. For this crime, Kimsey was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Oregon State Penitentiary. Many believed the disproportionately long sentence for attempted murder reflected the judge's unspoken conviction of Kimsey's guilt in the Trapper murders. Kimsey was eventually paroled in 1957 in his early 70s and lived out his remaining years in Idaho without further incident. But the Lava Lake murders remained officially unsolved. The question lingered. If Kimsey had an airtight alibi for the exact time of the murders, then who was the man who killed Nickols, Wilson, and Morris? This enduring mystery has fueled online speculation and investigative works for decades. While official reports acknowledge the strong belief that at least 2 individuals were involved, they never named a second suspect. However, author Melanie Tupper, in her 2013 book The Trapper Murders, puts forth a compelling theory. Kimsey's accomplice was none other than Ray Jackson Van Buren. Tupper paints Van Buren as the glib, easy talker that the Portland Furrier remembered, the one who could have charmingly lured the trappers from their cabin, disarming their suspicions. Van Buren, an associate of Kimsey's, was himself a dark figure, appearing with chilling regularity on the periphery of about a dozen unsolved homicide cases in Central Oregon during the early 20th century. He was a suspected serial killer. Tupper's theory suggests Van Buren was the social engineer who facilitated the ambush, allowing Kimsey to carry out the brutal attacks. Van Buren committed suicide in 1938, taking his potential secrets to the grave. A century later, the Lava Lake murders continue to captivate. It's a story told around campfires, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness and the eerie edge of unsolved mysteries. The official record remains unchanged. No one was ever convicted of these brutal killings. The deep woods of Deschutes National Forest still hold their secrets, an enduring testament to a crime that time has yet to fully reveal. If you have a mystery you think deserves a second look, or you just want to support the channel, like this video and join the investigation by subscribing. Stay curious, stay aware, and I'll see you on the next episode of Shadowline Mysteries.